Let's talk about that move that happened for naught. So the Lakers tried to trade for Mark Williams before the NBA trade deadline on the Wednesday night beforehand. That deal did not actually go through the league office, from what I understand, until Thursday. And all of it was contingent upon physicals. And Mark Williams, a player that Bryce and I extensively discussed as a player who has had many injuries throughout the course of his career, did not pass the Lakers physical. And I'm of a couple of minds on this. So this deal's been rescinded. Let's just note that from the jump here. This deal has been rescinded. It's not going to happen. Mark Williams is not going to play for the Lakers. My two minds are, long-term, yes. I think this is probably better for the Lakers than what the other option was here, which is that they lose all of their flexibility and optionality, having moved Dalton Connect, having moved the 2031 first, having then brought in Mark Williams, a player with a number of injury question marks that people around the league continued to have even while this whole thing was happening. Also, though, the Lakers aren't in a good spot now at the center position. They're going to have to sign a buyout guy. We'll see who that ends up being. Jackson Hayes is their current starting center. He's played okay. Here's the thing. The Lakers, throughout all of this craziness, they have really figured some things out on defense with the smaller lineup. They have really been able to be a lot more aggressive and forthright on the defensive end. LeBron, it feels like, has taken a bit of a lift on that end recently as well. Bringing Jared Vanderbilt back into the lineup, I think, has given them a ton of energy and aggression. So, yes, the smaller lineup is working, but it's hard to do that for 48 minutes in the playoffs. This isn't like baseball where you can just run out a bullpen game the entire game, right? And just make that work. You do, especially when you run into the Nuggets, when you run into certain teams, you're going to need an option at the center position to be able to deal with things. They'll be able to find options. So because they are over the first apron, they are not eligible to sign anybody who gets bought out, making more than the mid-level exception. So for instance, someone brings up Clint Capella in the YouTube comments. Clint Capella is not an option for them. They are not able to sign him. Somebody like Alex Len, or somebody like a Chris Boucher, a Larry Nance, if those guys were to get bought out, maybe it would be an option. But those guys aren't, Larry Nance is a difference maker, but he's not like a big. He's more of just like a, hybrid 4-5 kind of. Chris Boucher, really skinny, not necessarily like a true big in the, traditional sense of the word. So their options are going to be somewhat limited here. Honestly, their best option might end up being Jackson Hayes at the end of the day, because he's been in the scheme. He's been around the system at this point. He knows what it is under JJ Redick. But where does all of this leave you? The good news that you and I didn't really love this deal because we have questions about Mark Williams, probably better for the long term, but for the short term, it feels like they really made an error here, especially knowing that Mark Williams has these injury concerns going into this deal, and not doing like a backup deal of some sort as well, because they could have used another backup center at the end of the day. They could have gone out and gotten two centers and it probably would have been fine.
Yeah. So when the Luka trade happened, what night was that?
Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah. So yeah, because they had time, essentially, is my point, to go out and make another move to find the big, which they did. And to your point, if it's like Mark Williams, you wonder if hey, we know there's injury stuff here. We know that we may not like the medicals once we get our hands on it. Maybe we should move quickly on this just in case we don't like that, because then once you're past the deadline, you're past the deadline. So I think in the short term, it is concerning. It was the first thing I said whenever the trade happened, when I talked to people about okay, where are the Lakers at? We're going to talk about it here in a little bit in terms of where do we think this leaves them on the contender ranking. And when we talk about where they're at, I'm sure not having a big is going to come up over and over, especially when you consider OKC now has bigs. Denver has the best big in the entire NBA. The Grizzlies can play big. The Wolves, who have been playing better, have a big. Now I realize it's like it's not that kind of big, but all of those teams can not only have bigs but play like two bigs, right? The Wolves are finding success right now playing Gobert and Naz Reid together. So, and obviously the Thunder potentially with Chet and Hartenstein. So I think it really puts them in a situation in the short term for the rest of this year. Long term, I do think it opens up that optionality, that versatility, that potential to go out and maybe make a better move that is more suited to, okay, long term, what is this going to look like with Luka, with Austin Reeves, how much ever longer LeBron has. So it's a weird dynamic in that way where I'm like, okay, didn't like the trade. Now they get out of it, but also like where are they at for the rest of this season is a little bit worrisome.
Totally agree. Just to rehash like a couple of reasons why we didn't love this deal at the time for the Lakers. The injury history is just very real. Mark Williams has suffered ankle injuries in his rookie year, back injury his sophomore year, and then this year in his third season, came into the year with a foot injury that ended up requiring him to have some time on the sidelines to recover. He's played 85 games out of a potential, I believe it's like 219 or so that he could have played for the Charlotte Hornets in his 2.5 years in the league. And on top of that, like he is a very bad defender right now. People can talk about like the Hornets perimeter defenders hanging him out to dry as much as they want to. That's not inaccurate, but the other issue with Mark is that his overall rim protection is just not very good. He doesn't use his chest super well. He retreats far too much backward when contesting, and it results in guys just having an angle to finish and having sight lines, even though he has that 9'9" standing reach. These are improvable things. Like he is going to be able to hopefully get better at some point. But like right now, if we're talking for this season, in the playoffs, like I'm not 100% convinced that Jackson Hayes like would have been that much worse than Mark Williams right now. Mark Williams would have been a better offensive player because Mark is a really capable finisher around the basket, has really good hands, extremely long, very high standing reach, very high max vertical, if you want to put it that way, for Luka to be able to find on lobs. But like Jackson Hayes can also roll to the rim at a super, super high level. He's a super athlete. There are real concerns. Like, someone asked in the comments, is Mark Williams or Jalen Duren a better defender? They're pretty close. And like Bryce and I talk a lot about how substandard we think Jalen Duren is. Honestly, like I think Jalen Duren does a better job out on the perimeter than what Mark Williams does, which is
Mark just has physical tools that Jalen Duren doesn't. Jalen Duren doesn't have a 9'9" standing reach where you're going to feel him even if he's not in the correct position. As I've watched Jalen Duren more this season, I would venture to say Jalen Duren just like putting his hand in the pocket passing window and being in positions and stuff is probably, even though it's a weakness for him, is probably better than Mark Williams. He just doesn't have the straight length. The other thing with the Jackson Hayes point, the difference now though is you went from having Mark Williams as your starter and Jackson Hayes as your backup in 48 minutes of those, or 40 minutes and then 8 minutes of small ball, to now you only have Jackson Hayes as your option. And that's why this is concerning for the now, even though big picture, we did have concerns about what Mark Williams was going to be even for this season, especially defensively. I think we both thought offensively, this is exactly what Luka needs. How do the Lakers put a lob threat on the floor with Luka for all of his minutes unless Jackson Hayes is able to go 36 or whatever Luka's going to play in the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean that can't happen. Like it absolutely won't be a circumstance where Jackson goes 36 minutes. They'll go small through stretches, or they'll sign somebody, right? Like there are options, potentially over in Europe, depending on like I don't really want to dive into the European outs because like those guys' season like is still going right now, and I'm sure there are players that would love to come play for the Lakers, but like I don't have intimate detail on like the NBA outs that guys have like in season and things like that. So I don't want to, like dig into that and talk about those guys. Like I can talk about the Australian guys though. That season just ended this weekend, the regular season. Tasmania did not make the playoffs in part because Will Magnay got hurt this season, and he is still recovering from his injury. It looks like, he's getting going on the court again now. So, he couldn't come in and play immediately for the Lakers, but he is somebody where if I was the Lakers, like, I would probably try to cut Markieff and Christian Wood and, maybe bring in Magnay on a two-way, elevate Christian Coloco and then sign a buyout center that comes available, whoever it is, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, they're going to have to find a way to win on the margins there and see if they can. You might as well throw a few things at it and try to figure it out, because the one name we haven't mentioned as we brought up is now they do still have Dalton Connect. And so now the wing room has a little bit more depth than what it looked like whenever the trade was going through. And we've outlined some of Dalton Connect's concerns, especially on the defensive end. But one thing we know about Luka is he creates what? Wide open, weak side corner threes. Dalton Connect is a guy that can really score the basketball, really shoot the basketball, at least in theory. We'll see how he looks, in a playoff series and stuff like that. But now you still do have that wing in depth in terms of what he brings offensively at the very least. So now this center position is definitely where you want to throw any potential resources, avenues, attention, whatever, and throw as much at it as you can to try to piece together 48 minutes of as close to quality center play as you can get.
Yeah, totally. So look, it's going to be a lot of small ball. They're going to have to figure out some answers here. Look, throughout this whole thing, like I do feel quite bad for Mark Williams as well. I will just note here, because look, like I can tell you, this is out there publicly, but like, it wasn't like things that Mark Williams has had pop up before in terms of like his physical with the Lakers, right? That's been, I think Shams reported that, and like that's the impression I've gotten as well. So this isn't to say that like Charlotte, I want to be clear about this too, with these physicals, like teams do imaging on like the body, right, for different players, and they make sure that like everything is clear. Charlotte assuredly like handed over all of the information that they had on Mark. I would guess like that they did imaging like at the start of the season or whatever, and was happy to hand that over. And it's very possible that playing 25 games and practicing and everything, that maybe something has gotten a little bit worse with Mark Williams. Like, I'm not saying that this is what happened. I'm just saying that like, don't be so quick to be like, oh, Charlotte like withheld information or whatever, because I've seen that, conspiracy happening. That's just not the reality. Like these things, continue to build over time, right? That's the reality. So yeah, just as I look through all of this right now and look through it all, the person I feel the worst for is Mark Williams, because he's entering an extension window this summer. He's lost a lot of leverage here, even with how he's played, because of all of this injury stuff just being in the open space now. And I feel bad. Like I don't think that is a good thing for Mark Williams, that now, he's in this really difficult position to try and get paid. Like if I'm Charlotte, like I'm lowballing the hell out of him, saying like, you're not going to have a market next year.
Yeah, it's hard. And think about Mark Williams as well. Think about the emotions. And I guess Dalton Connect went through this to an extent as well of, okay, it's one thing whenever a team decides to trade you. Now you have to walk back into that building. So if you're Mark Williams, over a span of a week, you went from, okay, feeling like you're kind of balling out for the Charlotte Hornets, right? Like establishing yourself. You get traded to the Lakers, who are the hottest name in the league because they're the Lakers, but also just made this trade for Luka Doncic. You think you're going to get to go play with LeBron James and Luka Doncic, and you're like going to be the new Derek Lively, Daniel Gafford for Luka Doncic. And then all of a sudden you find out you don't get to. And as you highlighted, you may not even know why. Like like whatever the was found, maybe something you weren't aware of, or like who knows what that means for him. And then now you have to walk back into Charlotte where you feel like they didn't want you. Like I know they put out the press release where it was, I also thought it was funny. They refused to call them the Lakers. They called them the other team in the press release, which was hilarious. But like you have to walk back in to that. And I know they said, like, hey, the Lakers threw their best offer at us, whatever. But you got to feel like you're going to somewhere where you weren't really wanted anymore or valued or whatever. Can't be easy. So I don't know. It's just, it's got to be a tough situation for him. And I'm sure he'll handle it like a professional and go out and do his thing. But that's also a team that's just not very good, Sam. Like, so now you're going to have to go back and play in that environment where the talent level is just not great and they're not winning. And so it's tough. And same thing with Connect. I think it's probably easier for Connect to understand, I would think.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe like just the understanding of like, hey, we needed a big, whatever, but still they drafted you and then 6 months later they tried to trade you and now you're walking back into that building. Just tough situations to be in for those guys.
Yeah, so it's just really, really hard. I mean, it's it's a situation where I'm sure nobody was expecting or hoping this would happen, and here we are, and the Lakers should have, like, this is what it comes down to for me. Like, yes, the end result is probably good for the Lakers at the end of the day. The process here was not great. Like we can just say that, right? Like you and I talked throughout the deadline process that we thought that like somebody like Day'Ron Sharpe, somebody like a Jericho Sims, they could have gotten for a second round pick probably very easily and could have been their backup option if they wanted a body, right? And that would like Jericho Sims is better than anybody else in the buyout market outside of the Nance Boucher class that like it seems like is not going to come available. Boucher, Bobby Webster was asked about him at their post deadline press conference. And he said, like, we're really happy to have Chris. Chris is really happy to be here. So we don't foresee a buyout. I mean, Larry Nance, like Quinn Snyder loves Larry Nance and like wants him on the team. So maybe like, I'd be surprised if Larry Nance came available. Like, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'd just be surprised if that was to happen at this point. And now, if you're the Lakers, you just got to kind of make do with what's best. But in the long run, I do think that this is probably what is for the best. I'm sure Charlotte is very frustrated with this. Like I've, kind of gotten indications that Charlotte is like not happy with this process. Even their public press release makes it like clear that they are passive aggressively frustrated with this entire thing. Yeah. But look, like it's hard for them too, because I don't know how they feel about Mark Williams, but yeah. I know that like I was frustrated watching Mark Williams. I'm sure they were probably a little bit frustrated watching Mark on defense. They probably thought, oh my God, we just like cashed in.
Yeah,
like,
that's true. Yeah.
Handle this. And now he has to go back there with his value tanked in some way. Like that just feels really complicated to me too.
Well, so, and every other team in the league got to see the response to, wow, the Lakers gave up way too much for Mark Williams. So, nobody's going to be coming in with the offer of a young player and an unprotected first round pick because they're going to get kind of cooked for it the way the Lakers did when the Lakers made the deal. So, yeah, I mean, I didn't think about it from the Hornets front office perspective of, man, we feel like we just made a really good deal. Like this player who's been, had some injury history. Maybe we've been a little unhappy with some of the progression, defensive, whatever, however they feel about him.
Yeah.
And we turned him into, a guy that was just selected in the first round this last draft and a 2031 unprotected. Feel pretty good about that. And then now you have to bring him back in and figure out how you move forward with him. Or as you've mentioned, recoup the trade value in some way and get rid of this medical history stigma that's going to stay with him moving forward. So yeah, it's a tough situation all around.
It's a really tough situation.